Hello, my name is Iván Pin. I'm researcher in reservoir chemistry at the University of Stavanger. And today I'm here to present the work improving the EOR efficiency of smart water and polymer injection. This work was developed in cooperation with the bachelor and master's students during their thesis work. To start this presentation, I want to explain what is smart water. Smart water is an injection fluid that improves the wetting properties of oil reservoirs. It helps us to optimize fluid flow and recover more oil during production. Smart water can be simply prepared by modifying the ionic composition of the water. Therefore, smart water can be obtained by not adding any additional and expensive chemical additives. For this reason, it is more environmentally friendly than other chemical EOR methods. Smart water will have a direct impact in wetability. It will affect the fluid flow in porous media, affecting capillary forces, and it will also have an impact on the relative permeabilities of oil and water. But how does smart water work? Here you can see an example where a non-optimized brine is injected into a system and 40% of the original oil in place is recovered. Then we introduced a low salinity brine, which happens to be a smart water in sandstones, and we can obtain approximately 10% more. What other attributes we observed during this experiment? We observed that during the introduction of the low salt, there are minor changes in IFT. We also have a less favorable mobility ratio due to the low viscosity of the water, and even though we managed to increase oil recovery. So how can this be explained? This can only be explained by wetability alteration, increased capillary forces, and increased microscopic sweep efficiency. What is actually happening here is that when you flood formation water or a non-optimized brine, the water will follow the big pores, while smart water is capable of going into the smaller pores and increase the sweep efficiency and recover more oil. Here we can continue the explanation of smart water in sandstones. What we see when we flood smart water or low salinity in this case in tertiary mode, it's a small delay, but then the process starts and extra oil production is observed. In addition to that, we can observe an increment in the pH in the water effluent. This increment in pH is what triggers the wetability alteration processes. That reduces the absorption of crude oil on the surfaces, and then oil is accumulated and it can be pushed out of the core in this case. So to explain this phenomena, our group has put the chemical smart water EOR model in sandstones. This model simply explains how wetability alteration in sandstones occurs. Sandstones are negatively charged, and to be charge balanced, they take elements that are surrounding them. In the case of an oil reservoir, it happens that polar organic components in the crude oil can balance the charges, as well as ions and protons from the water. When the initial wetability of the reservoir is established, this is at equilibrium. However, when we introduce a smart water, we disrupt this equilibrium and cation exchange occurs. Therefore, as the ions comes into the aqueous solution, the surface of the sandstones need to be charge balanced, and then it uptakes a proton from the water, creating alkalinity in the surrounding media. This changes the affinity of the crude oil and it reduces it. And by doing this, more oil can be desorbed from the surface, and this leads to increased oil recovery. In this presentation, we also need to talk about polymer flooding. Polymer flooding is an EOR method that is aimed to increase the water viscosity. It is seen as an acceleration method of oil production. There are some reservoir properties that have to be taken into account when a decision for polymer flood is taken. The main parameters to study are the salinity, the temperature, and the oil viscosity. Typical polymers that are used are HPAM, AM, AMPS, and all of them are sensitive to the ions present in the water. They're also pH sensitive, and temperature sensitive. And there are many polymers that can have applications or that are designed for specific applications in the reservoirs. Some of them can increase their viscosity as the temperature increases, and some others are simply degraded by the temperature. Some others are designed to sustain high salinities in the reservoir and very harsh environments. So what are the positive points of injecting polymers in our oil reservoir? The positive effects are seen on the improvement of the fractional flow. We also observed a decrease in the water-oil ratio mobility. And in some cases, the polymer fall can help to divert injected water from zones that have not been swept. In this presentation, we're going to talk about hybrid effects between smart water and polymers. But what is an EOR hybrid effect? It's a combination of different EOR techniques in a sequential flood that can help to improve oil recovery beyond the efficacy of using these EOR methods independently. It's important to note that not all combinations might provide extra oil. So we need to take into account, what type of EOR method will go first. In this type of hybrid EOR effects, we're going to show the benefits of wetability alteration combined with other chemical flood, as it is the low salinity polymer flood. So in general, many researchers have worked in this. Arne Skage had reported hybrid effects with several low salinity brines. This is one example where he presented a low salinity effect together with a polymer flood. So in this type of floods, the positive synergy between the low salinity and the polymer is very efficient. And apparently, the initial wetability of the course is a key for having success in the deployment of these floods. Arne Skage in this work also found that the intermediate wet cores are giving a better response to this type of methods. So we took a dive into polymer flooding experiments. We started by preparing a polymer with a concentration of approximately 1000 ppm into a brine of 1000 ppm, sodium chloride. And what we had observed was that the viscosity at low shear rates was relatively high. But as we were increasing the shear rate, it was decreasing. This is a typical rheological behavior for a polymer. Then we decided to do a flow diversion test. And we set up a parallel tube model. You can see it here. So we had used a main line, and then we had used different diameters for 3 different tubes. And we flowed through this water, ethylene glycol, and low salinity polymer. With water, we observed that the heterogeneity in pore size with a single phase induces the flow to go through the more permeable diameters. And with the low salinity polymer, these differences were only increased. So the polymer was very selective in that regard. So we took a dive into core flooding experiments, and we had used sandstone material for this case that we know that is highly reproducible for parametric studies. The crude oil had a low acid number and a high base number. The initial water saturation was 20%, and the cores were aged at 60 degrees for 2 weeks. We had used a formation water in all restoration with approximately 100,000 ppm. The low salinity brine was 1,000 ppm sodium chloride brine. The seawater composition had a total salinity of 33,000 ppm, and it was based on a composition of the North Sea seawater. And the low salinity polymer flood was created with an HPAN called FlowPan 3630S from SNF, which gave us approximately 40 centipoises at 25 degrees and a shear rate of 10 seconds to the -1. This is a typical core flood setup that we have in the laboratory. So we started with the tertiary low salinity effects. And as we have described before, after the formation water, we observed approximately a 10% increase when the smart water effect takes place. This comes along with that increase in pH, and we also observed no significant changes in the IFT. In addition to that, we also run some experiments where in absence of oil, so we could see the total interaction between the brine and the rock. And we also observed a larger pH increase. This is due to the fact that in this case, we don't have buffer effects of the crude oil present in the core. Then what we thought that it could be an important way to accelerate the process was to test these low salinity brines in secondary mode. So what we did was instead of doing the flooding tertiary mode, we injected the low salinity straight away. And we observed a dramatic increase in oil recovery. We increase not only the speed, but also the ultimate oil recovery. The ultimate oil recovery is around 66%. And in addition to that, after 1 pour volume, our recovery factor is approximately 58%. So this is 50% more oil than what we have produced with formation water. So these results were very encouraging. Therefore, the order of injection, it's crucial when we're planning EOR project. Then we gave a try to test this hybrid effect. So we wanted to combine the smart water effect that we saw in secondary mode with polymers. Then after the test with the low salinity brine, we introduced the polymer. And to our surprise, we recover approximately 20% more. Therefore, in total, the ultimate oil recovery after the low salinity polymer flood was 86%. This is a staggering result compared to the tertiary experiments with the low salinity or only with polymer, which I will show later. So what is actually happened? What we think is that the trapped residual oil is efficiently displaced by the polymer, and that we have more mobile residual oil after the low salinity brine. So this entails that during this low salinity brine, we have a redistribution and also oil entrapment, but then this is efficiently displaced by the polymer flood. But everything has a cost. And what we see in the pressure drop is that low salinity flows very nicely through the system with a low pressure drop, but the polymer injection incurs in a cost of energy because the pressure drop increases to approximately 200 millibars. This is a parameter to have into account, if polymer wants to be injected into an oil reservoir. The injectivity will be reduced. So we want to explain the previous observations. So what we think is that during the secondary formation water flooding, we usually don't change the wettability. So there is a lot of immobile oil. However, when we inject in secondary the low sal, we are capable of producing more oil, but also changing the wettability. And even though we're trapping more oil, there is some oil that can be easily contacted by the low salinity polymer, and the residual oil saturation can be reduced substantially. So what we did later was to try to reduce the rate. We were injecting all this in all these floods approximately at a rate of 4 volumes per day. So we did the same with the low salinity brine, and we decided to reduce for some time the injection rate of the low salinity polymer. So we reduced it to 2 per volumes, to the half. And what we saw was that the oil recovery increased, but not in the same way as in the previous experiments when we didn't change the injection rate. After that, we increased again the injection rate, and we produce additional oil. However, the pressure drop increased considerable. In this case, the ultimate oil recovery was approximately 10% less. So we obtained 76% of the original oil in place, which is still being positive despite the increment in the pressure drop. Another experiment that we did was to inject in the opposite order. So we injected initially the low salinity polymer, and then this was followed by the low salinity brine. As you can see, the low salinity polymer is relatively efficient because we recovered approximately 68%. However, after the low salinity polymer injection, the low salinity didn't have any response. This is because all the polymer could have been adsorbed onto the surface, and the reactivity of the core was basically reduced. So no additional oil with low salinity after the low salinity polymer. Then we also did a test to see how was the performance of the low salinity polymer before a seawater flood. Seawater is an important fluid in the North Sea. This is widely used for pressure maintenance. So we were curious about that. And what we have seen is that the seawater didn't yield a much higher production compared to formation water. It only increased by 4%. However, when we introduced the low salinity polymer, we observed approximately 20% additional oil produced. At the right-hand side, you can see the pressure drop profile during the seawater flood. And then when we inject the polymer, the low salinity polymer pressure drop increased considerably. So the polymer flood is still recovering oil, but again, the pressure drop is a major concern in terms of injectivity. So now it's time to wrap up. And we can say that the secondary low salinity flood dramatically improved the oil recovery. It increased the ultimate oil recovery to 64%. That's a significant increase in comparison to low salinity in tertiary mode. It also gave this oil faster because the recovery factor was 59 after only 1 per volume injected. In relation to the low salinity polymer flood, we obtained a 66%. This was only 2% more than the low salinity injection in secondary mode. So the increase in viscosity didn't provide significant extra oil. However, when the low salinity polymer was increased in tertiary mode after the low salinity and the change in wettability, we obtained the highest ultimate recovery with an 86%. The tertiary low salinity polymer injection improved the displacement efficiency of around 22% independently of the core wetability that was seen after the low salinity and the seawater. We also observed an increased pressure drop during the low salinity polymer, which was the largest for the seawater after the seawater flood. Well, I hope that this was of interest for all the persons attending this presentation, and I want to thank you for being part of these EOR sessions. Thank you very much on behalf of the other authors, Tina Punterbold, Scully Strand, and the various students that had worked in this project. Thank you.